Hello marketer, it's Ty here and welcome to another episode of Lean Mean Marketing Teams. First off, I want to say sorry for the radio silence. I've been struck down with a prolonged cold and flu, and I've also been finishing off some really exciting projects. One involving a marketing and sales team redesign, and another was redesigning the marketing processes for a marketing team. But I am back now and we have some cracking episodes in store. So starting with today's episode, we welcome Matt Allison, Managing Director at Ubiquity Lab, to the podcast. If you're a marketeer in Australia with an interest in content marketing, then Matt will need no introduction. He was a pioneer in content marketing when he established the global content marketing function at Bupa and won several awards for the Blue Room. Since then, he started his own agency, Ubiquity Lab, that works with CMOs and marketing teams to combine data with customer insights in order to develop content strategies across paid, earned and owned channels. Matt knows a lot about content marketing and has a unique perspective, having built global teams in-house and through his work as an external advisor to CMOs and in-house teams. I go into what is covered in the episode shortly after we kick off with Matt, so I won't repeat it here, other than to say if you have any interest in building a modern in-house content marketing team with all the right skills and capabilities to drive commercial outcomes, then please stick around. And before I go, if you're enjoying the show, please remember to hit subscribe. Please also take a moment to leave us a rating and review on whichever podcast player you use. I read every review and this helps me continue to attract great names onto the show. And a reminder that we have detailed notes available for this episode, so don't bother stopping what you're doing to jot down notes. Just head to our website, look out for this episode and download the PDF summary notes of our conversation with Matt, with all the tips and strategies laid out in an easy to read format. Thank you and enjoy the show.
Welcome to Lean Mean Marketing Teams with Ty Hayes, where you'll hear from leading CMOs and thought leaders about what it takes to create a high-performance marketing team. This podcast is brought to you by Growth Generators, a consulting firm that helps CMOs design and build modern marketing teams that drive growth. If you need help optimizing your marketing team, head to growthgenerators.io. Now, let's get on to the show.
Matt Allison, Managing Director at Ubiquity Lab. Welcome to the Lean Mean Marketing Teams podcast.
Thanks for having me, Ty. It's a pleasure.
Yeah, and I was just thinking back before this interview as to where we met, and I believe it was Adam Fraser, host of Let's Talk Marketing, and prior to that Echo Junction that connected us. I think we'd both kind of struck out on our own, left client side to the dangerous dark world of consulting and starting our own agencies, and it connected us. So thank you, Adam, for that. And I'm grateful we've stayed in touch and shared a few lessons of our journey today.
True. And I think Adam's probably glad that you've taken the marketing podcast baton from him and run with it.
Yeah, well, I'm expecting him to come up again with a different kind of podcast, given his history in that space, but he did a tremendous job with his two podcasts. So now I'm really excited to have you on the show today as one of Australia's leading authorities on content marketing. I think you've got really strong track record in-house at Bupa, helping establish their global content strategy. Obviously been a keynote speaker, and now through the work you've done with brands at your agency, Ubiquity Lab, and I've got a ton of knowledge and insights to share and on the topic of content marketing. And I think it's super timely. I think COVID has taught brands that they need to deliver something of substance to customers. It's made them look more closely at how they provide value to customers throughout that customer journey. And interestingly, in the latest State of the CMO report 2021 by CMO Australia, found that more than half of the respondents increased in-house content production capabilities in the last year, with 78% running this function in-house. And I think you've got a really interesting perspective, having run content marketing in-house and now being an agency that supports in-house content marketing functions. I'd love today to dig into how content marketing's changed, what skills are required to be successful today, what a modern in-house content marketing team looks like, some of the challenges CMOs face to get this right, what they should be measuring, and when to get that external help. So a lot to cover. How does that sound?
That is a fairly meaty agenda, but let's do it.
Awesome. Okay, so to kick things off then, can you provide a brief summary of your career today?
I'll start in the present and then work my way backwards. So as you said, MD and founder of Ubiquity Lab, or ULab as we call it. Effectively, we play in three core buckets. So marketing and comms strategy and operations, execution, so whether it's video production, content marketing, PR, etc., and audience insights. And they're all interrelated. And I guess that for us, it's around how do we help to operationalize marketing across the whole paid, owned, earned journey, rather than, I guess, trying to pigeonhole ourselves as PR or content or something disconnected to the organization. I won't bang on about ULab for too long, but I think for us, we work with really big, well-known brands in B2B, B2C, whether it's superannuation, not-for-profit, health insurance, construction, private hospitals, et cetera, et cetera. It's a really, really broad mix. In terms of how we got there, I'll go way back to the start. And I was working in a PR agency some 20 odd years ago, having worked as a freelance journo for a while. And I guess I cut my teeth in corporate comms and issues management, moved to Wizard Home Loans, again, corporate comms role, which is really just storytelling. It's no different in a lot of ways to what content marketing and to some degree marketing is now. Fast forward at Bupa, we started in the corporate affairs role. My old CMO, John Moore, and I had this sort of brilliant idea to create an owned-led ecosystem and content marketing hub. It was before content was cool in Australia.
Yeah.
So it was a really interesting time because there was no, I mean, if you're doing it now, you've got agencies and playbooks. There wasn't that.
Case studies and best practices. Yeah.
So we were trying to learn everything we could from people in the States because we just saw it would enable us to have a different conversation with customers, as you pointed out, and then to fuel our marketing. So we built what was then the Blue Room. We were the second sort of major corporate behind ANZ to launch a content hub. I won't go down the rabbit hole of whether Blue Notes was a content marketing hub or not. We'll have that discussion another day. And I guess from there, we built a team and a really successful operating model of in-house, out-house, journalists, designers, social media was core, search, et cetera, et cetera. And then we globalized that across predominantly Australia, UK, Spain, Hong Kong, and then myriad other sort of countries in between. It was a really, really cool, fun, exciting journey. And I guess that's what sort of was the genesis or catalyst. When I spoke to people like you about how we were melding skill sets together, people like, you should do that yourself. And ULab was born.
Yeah, brilliant. Remarkable background. And I know that the Blue Room won numerous awards, and no doubt, it's kind of been one of the pinnacles of content marketing, at least in Australia and globally. And I can see how you saw that opportunity in the market to bring data and an agency together across paid, earned and owned. So I'd love to tap into more of that knowledge and insight that you've got around this throughout the episode. So let's get into it then. So given the main focus of the episode is around content marketing, is there a definition you like for content marketing so that our listeners are all on the same page?
I guess for me, what I say for content marketing, it's about how do you build and target and nurture a discrete target audience and monetize it. And I guess that's the Matt version. I don't like a lot of the content marketing sort of descriptors because I think they focus on own too much. And even that example I've given you about build and nurture, and that's got to be across paid owned channels, it's too simplistic for what content marketing is. I mean, when I talk about content, I use it as a catch-all. So it includes search, data-led insights, PR, UX, distribution, et cetera, et cetera. And I think sometimes to my detriment where I say content marketing because I expect that everyone shares the same sort of descriptor. But for my version of content, which I'd liken it almost to the blood pulsing through marketing's body, I go, that's this really cool space that's the glue within your marketing ecosystem. That's very different to I produce web copy and hope somebody will find it.
I like that analogy, blood through the marketing body. And I do like that it's a lot broader. And I think that's some of the way that content marketing has evolved perhaps through the years. And I guess touching on that then, since your success client side and now starting your own agency, how have you seen content marketing change over, say, the past 10 years?
It's changed immeasurably. I mean, I think the biggest thing now is how precise you have to be and strategic to win. And if I look at this, content's just another lever within the marketing mix. So if we look at marketing, I mean, what was it 10 or 15 years ago? I can't remember the exact stat, but we saw 2,000 ads a day. Now we see 10,000 ads a day, and that doesn't include social, et cetera, et cetera. Like you and I have spoken about, and it's true, we live in an attention economy. So people, they've had enough. They're at capacity. You would have to be awake for 48 hours a day to consume all of the input that you see around you. And I think you couple that with this democratization of publishing, and then you combine that with everybody's jumped, or a lot of corporates have jumped on the bandwagon. So there's this massive deluge of content and content marketing. And that's where I go back to, you've got to be really strategic and really precise in what you're doing. And I think that competition is certainly from a corporate perspective, greater than ever before. But then you're competing with TikTok videos. So it's huge. And it just keeps going and going. So if I look at this, you've then got, I think the other biggest change for me is that too many of these people that I would say add to the noise are focused on themselves and not their customers. So you would have heard the Joe Pulizzi quote, which I think I've used in every presentation, but he said, your customers don't care about you, your products or your services. They care about themselves and their needs. And I think that's been, I mean, Joe probably said that 10 years ago, but is even important or more important now than ever before, given this deluge of crap. And then the final part of this, paid. There is absolutely no point doing content without having a really sophisticated distribution strategy, which has to include paid amplification, as well as whether it's EDM or whatever works for your audience. But thinking that you will produce this amazing content and people will find it is a fallacy.
Yeah. Absolutely. So true. And back in the good old days, 10 years ago or so, when social media was mostly organic and you could reach your entire audience without paying. And now you might reach, 2 or 5% or something without paying. And just the fragmentation of social media channels and the rise of audio, Spotify, Clubhouse, all these different platforms. Like you say, the ability to be precise and take a data-driven approach and have a strategy is now so much more important, because you can't do everything on every channel. You can't be everything to everyone. And understanding your customers' needs and being relevant, providing value at the right time through that customer journey. Obviously the increase in CX and the importance of that is another thing coming out of State of the CMO, and all research showing that rise in understanding of organizations that they need to serve a purpose and serve their customers. So
just as I pick up on one of your points, which I love, which is around audience and channel fragmentation. That's certainly a lot deeper today than it was 10 years ago. But this goes back to strategy and precision. Who are you targeting and why? And what do you want them to do? And that's got to dictate, also map to business outcomes. That dictates your audience and your channel selection largely. And it's also, for me, I go, do one thing really well. Do two things, like learn to walk before, or crawl before you can walk.
Absolutely. Fantastic. Okay, well, given some of these changes, what do you think are the main challenges that most CMOs face today in relation to doing content marketing well?
The first thing is being able to identify where you sit on the maturity journey. Mm-hmm. So until you know what is or isn't working, I don't know how you're going to fix it. And I think you need to really just clearly map your current capability as well as the end state that you want to achieve. And it's not until you've gone through that process that you can work out how to get there. Strategy. You have to have a strategy, and a content marketing, and I say content again within that very broad paid, owned, earned, physical, digital, you've got to have a very clear content strategy that maps to business outcomes. I mean, you know what it's like. If you turn up when you're a former CMO, if you turned up talking about doing pretty pictures and a video that,
it's going to go viral, and we're going to get so much website traffic. Well done.
Yeah. So, I mean, it has to be a business decision or a business discussion, which is a metrics sort of conversation too. I think the other thing I see is the ability to execute. And I think that it's all good and well to have an amazing strategy, but if you don't have first rate, let's just talk content producers. If you don't have, if you're trying to use a copywriter rather than a proper journalist, you're setting yourself up to fail. I mean, if you expect the office, not to kick the office intern, but the office intern to be able to go and shoot a 90-second doc, I mean, you've got to invest in capability so that the execution is amazing, given, again, the competitor set we're talking about of direct and indirect. And then finally, I think it's the ability to measure success. That's something that I see so many people grapple with, and particularly success that we're talking about with content. It's a marathon, not a sprint. It almost goes back to, it's not change management, but how do we sell a midterm vision that we're going to invest in the midterm, but then the yield is going to be much higher because it doesn't decay like advertising or the like? How do we have that conversation? So I think they're almost the strategic pillars that I think most people are grappling with.
Yeah, and a lot to unpack there, because obviously everything needs to start with strategy, and obviously you need your marketing strategy, you need your CX or your journey and a deep understanding of your different audience insights and their customer journey, and then you got to craft this content strategy or content journey and how that fits with the broader strategic pieces and what objectives you're going to measure. So how do you go about that, and where do you see content marketing fitting in that, or what's the process you guys undertake to help CMOs develop that?
In terms of just a benchmark where you're at, you mean? Or
just how content marketing aligns back to your marketing strategy, has the right commercial outcomes through the customer journey.
Gotcha. Sorry, my mistake. Yeah. We sort of call it the 3 C's for us, and it's typically a full day workshop. And before that, we've digested myriad marketing, the search, there's so many different strategies. I think this is my challenge sometimes. Like, we've read the 38 strategies, we've read all of the first party data, the verbatims, and there's so much. It's about sitting down and really clearly mapping the 3 C's for us. So that is, what are the commercial outcomes you want to drive? And it's getting really granular. So it's not increasing profit by 20%. It's looking at or increasing market share. It's getting really, really granular on what specifically we want to achieve. And it's starting to get clear. And this is always fun when you've got senior stakeholders. Say you've got a head of retention and head of acquisition in the room, and then you've got head of cross-sell as well. So what's the business focus on? What is the number one priority? And it's not being half pregnant. It's saying, okay, if we look at the business strategy that the CEO's written and the board's approved, is it growth of X%, and where does that growth come from? So if we park our egos, we're focused on, for argument's sake, acquisition, increasing acquisition by 40%. From there, who are the customers that are going to drive that, and getting really, really granular on the customers. So one of the things that we hear all the time, our target audience is women aged 25 to 55. I'm like, great, that's largely useless. The difference is one of our clients, a super company, they were the first client where their target audience is literally everyone, so the 16 and above.
One of the very few companies that have that audience profile.
Yeah. But for most organizations, so it's spending real time unpacking that. And typically, again, like I'd say 95% of this work is all done by organizations, and they have it. It's about trying to almost lift it up and stitch it together. So if we're hitting, as we used the example before, if the target's 20% acquisition, who's going to drive that? And then is it about lifetime value, or is it about short-term acquisition? And looking at that, a 25-year-old version of me was probably a lot more fun, but you're at a very different life stage. So it's starting to marry life stages, and then where their interests are, where they are in the customer journey, et cetera, et cetera. So we then start to get this really clear focus on who we're going after and why. It's then around assessing the competitors. It's a sort of market scan in terms of, if we're now looking at it from a content perspective of what can we own, and you can own whatever you want if you have unlimited pockets, but it's also going, if organization A is doing that incredibly well, or if we have a product deficiency there, then how else do we get to this exit point we're trying to? So it's just it's a granular process. And then from there, we would typically start to use search data at this stage, given it's a content play, to understand what are the keywords that these people will be looking for initially. And I go, keywords, just a list of keywords is near useless. Anyone who gives you that and says produce content, it's not particularly helpful. I'll leave it at that. But starting to then categorize search data into customer intent. So what are they trying to do? Mapping that specifically to the customer journey. So then we can see at each stage of the customer journey, and let's say pre-trigger. So, you're wearing a red jacket. This is a terrible example, but people might be searching how to stay warm. They're not actually looking for red jacket at this stage. So let's start to understand what they're looking for so that we can then nurture them. Then we can start to build a web hierarchy of what we need. We can start to build the path points into terms of the handoff points. We know exactly what content we need at each stage. We can think about the distribution plan. That to me is how you start to develop a sophisticated content strategy, as opposed to doing content.
Love that. Simple. Yeah, it's complex the way you boil it down. More difficult than it sounds, but it makes sense to look at that commercials, the customer, the competitors, and then, that customer intent, and kind of mapping that through the customer journey. And do you think that's a change in the maturity of content marketing over the past 10 years, that it's full funnel now? I think in the early days it was seen as this inbound marketing, this way to get almost free leads at the top of the funnel and perhaps bring them down to acquisition, where now it's with the I guess, increasing importance of CX and mapping our customer journeys and providing value through that. It plays a role in every stage, from upsell, cross-sell, acquisition, retention, lost customers. Is that something you've seen?
Yeah, no, you're 100% right there. And this goes back to, for me, it's understanding it at each stage of the journey. So, if you're doing a TV ad, and this is, again, my very loose, which a lot of performance marketers would hate, but if you're doing a TV ad, then you need to have SEM ads. You need to have own content that's ranking. So you need to have loaded the content in advance. You need the tags loaded so you can retarget. So content is the delivery mechanism for a lot of this. If we're thinking about what are the assets across that, now the content department's not typically playing with the creative developing at the above the line, which is fine, or eminently sensible in a lot of instances, but they need to be interdependent in terms of how they're working together. And you're right that it's then around, even for me, when we were talking before about mapping customer intent, that effectively provides a really clear data breakdown for exactly what you should be targeting from an SEM and performance marketing perspective. So it's around then also with how do people perform on the pages, what resonates. It's got to all come together in one holistic marketing strategy, as opposed to being silos at different stages of the funnel.
Yeah, excellent. And I think that's what I've seen through some of my consulting work. I'm brought in to look at sales and marketing structures and see how they can become more modern and future fit. I think depending on the level of maturity, more immature teams might just be about, do we have the right in-house capabilities to develop the right kind of creative content for the different social platforms? They're looking at digital designers or producers, audio, if they're going down podcast routes. But it's not to get to the more sophisticated teams where, what's the SEO? What skills do we have there? How are we bringing this all together? And where should this team sit? Where the real opportunity sits, not just creating the content, but it's the data and the insights and the SEO and how that can all play a role, which I think is where the opportunity lies. But coming back to strategy and measurement then, I know it depends, and we've kind of touched on this, so I'm not sure if there's much more to expand, but what are the right kind of metrics that you should be looking at for content? If anyone's read Lean Startup, they know there's vanity metrics, and you touched on it before. As a CMO, the board doesn't care about views or level of engagement. It needs to almost be those laddering metrics that are a clear indicator of a step in the customer journey that leads to acquisition. So it might be content downloads or something that is a trigger that pulls someone closer, lead scoring, etc. But what are some of those tangible measures that generally find their way onto the content strategies that you develop?
You're right. The most important thing for me is map to business outcomes. And this is very different whether it's B2B or B2C. So if we go B2B, it's typically marketing qualified to sales qualified leads. If it's B2C, it might be a broader reach play or engagement. But I think irrespective of what segment it is, for me, it's almost looking at two core things, which is audience and outcome. And this is oversimplifying it, but are we hitting the right audience and are they doing what we want them to do? Whether that's returning to the site or whether it's signing up for an email or engaging more deeply with content or whatever that looks like. But audience goals. And I think even before that, is it the right audience? Because you're much better, particularly in smaller and more niche industries, for 10 warm leads than 100 people and only one of them's relevant. So, that's the most crucial gate check for me to start with is it the right audience? I think from there, it's then looking at, are they taking the action that we want them to take? So we're trying to, whether we call it nurture or manipulate or push or, whatever marketing term, are they clicking through from social media to X? Are they downloading a white paper? Are they re-engaging, giving us more information to populate the CRM? How are they scoring us from a net promoter perspective? Are they feeding into qual and quant research? So I think they're really tangible outcomes for me. They all lead to sales, but I think it's overly simplistic to try and attribute a direct dollar amount to content marketing per se.
Wow, there's been a lot covered in this interview so far. As a marketing leader, we know you like to spend more time taking action and less time taking notes. So we've got you covered. We packaged up all the tips, strategies, and resources from each episode into some beautifully crafted notes just for you. Not ugly AI-generated transcripts, but real notes taken by a real person on our team. To grab the notes, head on over to growthgenerators.io, look out for this podcast episode and download the notes. But be quick, they're only live for a few weeks after the episode airs. Now, back to the show.
And on the top, there's no doubt content marketing is critical for B2B marketing or industries where there's higher value more complex decisions or user journeys. But it begs the question, what if it's not a complex sale, not B2B? What if it's commodity?
It's a really tough one. I find it harder to think of an industry where you couldn't tell amazing stories and engage a particular audience. I personally find it really hard, and I think this is the inherent storyteller in me, but find it really hard to come up with an industry that it wouldn't be relevant if done the right way. So I was recently judging awards, and it was a bakery publication, and I looked at them and what they were doing. It was so sophisticated. And it was a sub-segment of bakery, but I'm trying to generalize so I don't sort of get in trouble with it. But looking at the results that they were achieving across an entire ecosystem fueled by content to a very, very small and specific audience. I've seen case studies on a flour company or a pen company, really, really niche, who have built up these massive audiences, which they've monetized. So I think if we go back to, is something like destroying rocks, or I don't even know what the industry is it relevant to me because largely inept for most manly gardening activities? Not relevant at all. But there will be a discrete audience who is going to buy their products, who are enamored with that. And if I think about Coles or Woolworths, they are content marketing behemoths. Or if you think about the Zero, again, I know it's B2B, but you go, it's actually pretty dry at small business. So the skill is in understanding who your audience is, what they want, how you can provide utility and engage them, and then ultimately nurture and buy. Like, even one of the things I love with GE, they're and I have a crush on GE, big B2B, one of the best content marketers in the world, but they've got 4 discrete audiences. And if I think these through, they target their internal staff. What have they got? So key decision makers, they've got enthusiasts, and then they've got consumers. And I remember listening to a presentation that was done in the States. The reason that one of the world's biggest, I'm assuming, B2B companies targets consumers is that they want them to invest in their stock and they want them to work for them in the future. So you go, it's breaking down this dichotomy of everything to everyone. It's really strategically targeting specific audiences to drive an outcome you want.
Yep. Makes sense. Okay, so the next section of the interview, we're going to dive into those skills and roles you need on a modern marketing team. Before we get into this, I thought I'd get your views on these comments, and it touches on some of what we've already discussed. But again, looking back at the state of the CMO report, it identifies the skills gaps where marketers feel it most. This is number 1, analytics, data and science skills. Number 2 was marketing ops and tech platforms. Number 3 was experience design, UX, UI. Number 4, customer insights and buyer behavior. And number 5, content creation and production. And what I just thought was interesting in that, and the kicker, was content marketing kind of requires the first 4 to be done well, right? So it's no longer about just developing creative content. It's becoming much more scientific and much more advanced.
Yeah, you're 1,000% right again. And the days are gone where you create content based on gut feel. If you don't have a data-led approach to content marketing, you're behind the 8 ball. And to be honest, I think you're probably just burning a lot of money hoping something will stick. So you're right. It's all interrelated.
Yeah. Brilliant. Okay, so getting into it then. So if you were to build an in-house content marketing team again, where would you start? What roles and capabilities are vital on the team?
I think strategies, we've said, I think having the content strategist to head the operation is the most important. But I think there's a step before that, is where I see really successful content strategists and sort of content change makers fall down, is not having executive support. So I think the most essential, I've experienced this personally, the most important person when you're doing something new is your executive sponsor. And without their ability to help sell the vision to the board when you're doing something different. I know for my Bupa days, I actually say the CMO at the time was the most important cog in that.
Yeah.
So even when we're talking a lot with and helping companies do this in-house, it's almost sitting there and mapping out who are the key stakeholders, who do we need to get on board, who are the detractors, who are the advocates.
Yeah.
I think it's a long-winded way of saying that you need an executive champion. So the first one for me is the content strategist. If you've only got one person, and I pity this poor person that's going to run a whole content operation, but somebody ideally from a journalistic background or some other, I mean, look, you don't have to pigeonhole them as a journalist. There are I've seen some very, very good content editors, not from a journalistic perspective. Someone who has that innate storytelling ability and the ability to marry it up with commercials. And to be fair to a lot of really good journalists, I mean, when you recruit an in-house journo, you almost have to help extrapolate their skill set so they learn to be a lot more commercial, understand social. So I'm not saying having a go at either side, but so we've got our strategist. I think from there, the next person I'd employ is a content editor, because I think it's unrealistic. And look, for smaller organizations starting out, they may be one and the same person. But if we have a strategist who's doing all of the change management, the strategy, thinking across paid, owned, earned channels, I think then trying to have them lead a fairly detailed editorial process is a bit tough. Next off the rank for me, next is my search, data, and digital unicorn. And I think putting digital on the end of that's unfair. To start with, what I want is a search and data person who can really help me unpack the customer journey, customer intent, et cetera, so that we then know what content we're going to produce. And I guess that's why I've put data ahead of, say, digital or social, because until you know what the end state again looks like and what you're going to produce, there's no point thinking about how you're going to amplify it.
So this person's looking at your CRM data, any of your marketing automation, as well as maybe Ahrefs or SEMrush, and looking at the search intent keyword planner tools.
In a perfect world, yeah, that is a black unicorn you just described. But certainly that's or able to work with them. And this again could be with the content strategist or the like. I mean, I think if for someone who's looking more at your, let's call them SEOM tools, and then potentially some other data and analyzing it, I think that there's really clear, I think it's challenging to have someone who's so right brain focused, then looking at customer verbatims or the like. I think you need to marry the two together. But yeah, I think from there in, I've probably got digital next. Digital I'm using extremely broadly. And by this, I mean somebody who is going to help build this owned platform that all of our content is going to live on. So that then has all of your bag of, UX, digital, everything else that sits within that. Then I've got social. How are we going to distribute this content? And they may be looking at other third-party tools that do not typically sit within social, but it's a distribution person with a really deep specialization in social. That's the sort of core team and leadership team for me. And we've already got quite a few headcount and we haven't really produced any content yet.
I love it though. It makes sense from top down, and you can see how that would all play together.
But look, you asked for my utopian view. So let's make this really fun. So next, I'm recruiting a journo or journos. I'm training all of the journos in search. And by search, I mean, look, they don't need to be doing website audits. It's really around keywords and how to optimize a piece of content. And journos, I've found really, they pick this up so well. They're natural storytellers. They want to know how to get the maximum bang for their buck. They just haven't been exposed to this in journo land before. So I've got journos there. Next, I've got a designer, because how do we all know we need to be atomizing content. We'll find a black unicorn designer that can do infographics, social tiles, animated videos, the whole shebang, but somebody to bring it to life visually. I mean, look, I would have had data visualization also, and these next tier are in no particular order. I think data visualization for me is such a big one now in terms of how do we actually make really complex information snackable and engaging and atomizable. And that's a real skill set. I've got audio and I've got video as key skill sets. And then I've got PR and earned media, thinking again about how do we amplify and distribute. So that is for me my utopian content marketing team. And I would also have them then really connected into the performance marketing team, the broader marketing team, the sales team. We're not creating this sort of siloed activity. Like, it's around that interconnectivity. And in some ways, I mean, people often say to me, where does content live? And this team could live within a sales team. It could live within the brand team. It could live within marketing. I don't actually think it matters. The only risk, I think, sometimes where I've seen it in brand is I find it tends to be a bit more focused on reputation and NPS and the like, and not that that's wrong, but from a sustainability perspective, I can tell you it's a lot easier when you turn up and say, we did that and delivered that much in sales, rather than we increased NPS. But I think you also then run the risk that if it sits in the sales team that's so focused on short-term activation, you don't have the brand building. So I think and it almost goes back to that leadership again for me. I mean, I'm sort of agnostic as long as it's straddling and really deeply connected with all of these departments and working in unison. I don't actually care where it sits to some degree.
Yeah, I think it's always an interesting question and conundrum, something I'm often asked as well. But oftentimes I found it is, sometimes it's in with digital, sometimes it's just separate in its own function, but working really closely with digital performance marketing and CX, as you say. I think as long as they've got the right strategy and the leadership and you've got a collaborative culture, then it doesn't matter too much.
And you can't decouple it. I mean, so if we're talking about where social lives, I go social for bigger organisations. I mean, they're working hand in glove with the customer service team, if not training the customer service team in how do you work. See, I think we end up now, we could make an argument for most departments to sit somewhere. And I think we almost just need to break this down and go to your point. How do we collaborate in an agile and efficient manner, forgetting about where we live?
Yeah, become more organic with it. And how do you think your thinking has changed in terms of this establishing content team since your days at Bupa and I guess the learning you've had since starting your own agency?
I think for me, if I think back to Bupa, and I say this with some pride but some embarrassment as well, that I was more of a content marketing purist when I started, more along the content marketing institute of build and nurture an audience and establish trust and credibility, and your tribe want you every day. And I still agree with that, but now I go, you have to monetize them. And I think that it was a learning for me that once I started to see the power of, like, I remember content that we were producing contributed to highest ever sales, quarterly sales. When we've worked with other organizations that we start to go, the point of doing this is to drive a sales. I think I was a little purist through naivety back in the day, but as you've learned and you now go, we can still achieve everything in terms of beautiful storytelling and utility and emotional connection and everything else, and make money at the same time. It's not either or.
Yeah. On the monetization, I think that's fascinating. I think thinking about organizations becoming media organizations and building an audience they can monetize is still new thinking for some companies. I think traditionally in content marketing, we think about how do we develop an audience pool that we can market our existing products and services to. But through your work and maybe through the case studies you've seen, what are some of the innovative use cases where a company has transitioned more from let's not just build an audience to sell our existing products and services to them, but let's build an audience to sell new innovative products and services? It might just be advertising, or it might be online learning, especially through COVID days, or an augmented product. Have you got any interesting use cases around that?
I think the one I always go back to in terms of one of the best in classes is a bank called Santander, and they're in the UK and Spain and all around the world. But I was reading about this, so I'm going to be very loose with the numbers, but I was reading this case study the other day that they specifically decided to target a new product to millennials. These guys, again, they're another one I've got a content crush on. Like, they are so sophisticated. Have you seen them?
No, I haven't. No.
I'll send you the link, but they're so sophisticated.
We'll put it in the show notes for anyone that's interested.
Yeah. Perfect. Running this full paid-owned earned ecosystem, their content is amazing. Like, they produced a 17-minute documentary for millennials, apparently have no attention span. And they achieved something within, like, all of the vanity metrics were huge, but they hit their annual sales target for new onboarding to millennials. I think the annual target they achieved in 2 weeks or something like that, all content led. And it was just for them. And it's I'll flick you the link, but when you look at the content, it is on point. It is not produced by a bank. It is something that the age group obviously resonates with. And then it was the initial part. I mean, they had, I think it was a rapper or something. And it was a parody of a rapper in this sort of short film. But you look at then the social shares, because I started digging into it, the social shares. And then you think, right, now we've got these people in the sales funnel. How do we introduce offers? How do we start to get the performance marketing more sophisticated based on the emails, et cetera, et cetera? That for me is where you're taking down a journey. I mean, there's other organizations that sell advertising. If we're talking about it from a digital perspective, I'd personally be advertising my products rather than trying to advertise others, but it's an option. If you look at a lot of magazines, which again, if you look at a Coles or a Woolies or a Bunnings magazine, they, I would hazard a guess, make a fortune through advertising and sponsorship, and they've then got content they can atomize all over their website and other channels. So I think it's just starting to think from that B2C perspective a little bit more broadly around how can we drive income through content rather than it being this passive thing that we produce once and forget about.
Yeah, I think it's something interesting for marketing teams to think about, how they can innovate the products and services or drive new revenue streams once they start building this audience, as long as it's based on customer insights and providing value back to that audience.
But I look at it too, and you go, the performance marketing, you go, look, Sean, who does this, is a genius. I am not. But I observe when we've done this with clients, like, and we've seen where you've got content and search running in unison. So we've got case studies where we had 500% increase in conversions at half the cost, because when we did the intent research, we were able to understand exactly what customers wanted. So all of a sudden, generic ads that weren't working, we were able to come in, fix everything, target it specifically, and it worked. Lo and behold, you could then start to see this is the specific piece of content we need based on search to get us to rank. Let's optimize it. Then it's the landing page. So again, it's that whole holistic approach rather than passive content.
Fantastic, Matt. With one eye on the clock, we might move through a couple more questions before we get to our Fast Five. So what do you think CMOs need in place before they build an in-house content team?
A pilot that demonstrates quick wins. So if we look at my utopian team back then, I mean, good luck to any CMO that says, I need headcount and X, dollars for this. I think that's unrealistic. I think most organizations are doing content well or okay, to be frank. So it's not like this is an organization saying we should start to produce content. Every organization produces it. I think it's about getting a really clear, like, again, a strategy for a pilot. You don't have to skin the entire cat. Go in, test it, validate the results, which helps you build to get that buy-in. So I think that for me is always easier. I think it's also looking at the team that you go, and we say this to all of our clients, you need to use us to build the business case to hire internal journalists or talent. But you can't do that until you've produced 6 to 12 months of amazing content, and then you start to stack up an FTE cost versus an agency cost. And you need the FTE. Like, I actually advocate for people to that we will help people stop using us. And it's never that simple, because the in-house journo, then, they'll do BAU, you still need agencies. But again, it's about walking before you can crawl, and then almost having those financial checkpoints in terms of this is what you need to hit to unlock the next level.
Yeah, that makes sense. You've touched on most of this already, but any last comments on?
I think it's just, look, whether it's us or any agency, it's where you need it. Is the strategy right? If the strategy's not right, the execution's not going to land. Or you might have the world's greatest strategy, but you don't have the capability for the execution. So I think it's for organizations just being realistic about where you need help, and also getting an external perspective. I know that when I was internal most of my career, that you do become a little insulated in your thinking. And I mean, it would be no different when organizations get you to come in and help, that you've got this much broader purview. And I think that's the other thing that can help people. I guess the other one for me is, and I did this a lot when I was building the team at Bupa, for some reason, people view external people as having greater expertise in some instances, rightly or wrongly. And I did this. I leaned on agencies to help me sell the idea. And that would involve me calling the agency off and saying, this is the idea, go and pitch it. After I'd pitched it 5 times, and someone would then say to me, they had a great idea.
Yeah. Saw that time and time again as well. Yeah.
Yep. And you go, I didn't care about it from an ego perspective because I achieved the outcome I wanted. So I think it's just, it's an agency should be an extension of your team, not an agency. And it's how can they help you?
Yeah, brilliant. Okay, Matt. Well, we are now ready for our Fast Five, where we ask 5 rapid questions. Are you ready?
I am excited and will be rapid.
Okay. What do you believe are 3 essential capabilities or criteria of a high-performance marketing team?
Curiosity has to be number 1 for me. One of the things I love about my team in particular, but also marketers generally, are inherently curious people. We want to understand how things work, how we can do it better, how we can improve. So I think curiosity is a must-have. Culture for a team, I think culture is the most important thing. So you have to build an incredible culture to achieve those outcomes that you want, of course. The other one for me is commercial thinking. And that sounds silly because all marketers think commercially. I guess what I mean by commercial thinking is just being really clear on the connection between what you're doing and the overarching business goals, as opposed to siloed commerciality.
Yeah. Love that. 3 C's again. That's good. And how would you describe your team's culture in one word?
Genuine. In these shitty times, to be honest, we love the fun. Like, we're genuinely having fun and enjoying what we do.
Brilliant. Love it. What's one metric you've successfully used to track and measure team performance?
Asking in the team whip each week, 1 to 10, how are you feeling?
Yeah. Yeah, I love that, the emotional check-in, and it helps everyone know where everyone is, you know, what page they're on, and it helps build trust, doesn't it? If someone says, I'm a 6, well, what shit, you okay? What's going on? You know, that human connection.
And it's simple. Like, and it's because it's trend lines. It's like, what were you last week? So if someone's consistently trending low.
And acknowledges during COVID we are through tough times, especially over East, where you're still in lockdown, and we bring our whole selves to work. We don't just, you know, switch off once we head into the home office, switch off all the other things going on in our life. And what is one skill or capability you've learned recently that you wish you'd developed much sooner in your career?
Learning not to speak as much. Part of it's active listening, but part of it's also got really smart people that you work with, and it's don't chew up oxygen. You know, let them, they're smarter than you. Let them answer. Like, you don't need to fill the space.
Yeah, which is probably hard, especially when the organization's young, you know, how to almost put your ego aside and say, I don't have to be the one with all the answers. And you say, I've got really intelligent people that can answer that. And what book or books have you read that you found yourself recommending to others and you think our audience would gain value from?
I think my favorite book is by Richard Rummel. It's Good Strategy, Bad Strategy. It just crystallizes so well what a good strategy looks like and what bad doesn't, and why. And the examples he uses to bring it to life is first rate. So I think it's applicable for everybody, regardless of role.
Yeah, fantastic. We'll link that up in the show notes. And where can people go to get in touch with you or learn more about Ubiquity Lab?
Website's the best one, and I won't spell it because it was... When you come up with a ubiquitous name in Ubiquity Lab, it's brilliant and very clever until you have to read your email address out to people. Google Ubiquity Lab or Matt Allison, then you'll find us.
Yep, it'll be in the show notes as well. Well, Matt, wonderful to catch up over a conversation recording this time. Like I said, you've got such a fantastic track record in content marketing. I think you've helped shed new light on how it's advanced and matured over the years, the capabilities that you need in a content team these days, and a lot of them, even though if it is the holy grail, but just outlining that content strategy, editor, the data, the digital, the social, and all those other positions just shows the sophistication of what's required to do this well and properly, how to measure it, how to put the right framework and strategy in place, and how to get the support of your executive. So lots of great tips for our audience to take away to help them, go up that maturity curve on their content marketing journey. So once again, thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you, Ty. It's been a pleasure.
You've been listening to Lean Mean Marketing Teams with Ty Hayes. If you love the show, please remember to hit subscribe so that you can discover more tips and strategies to build a high-performance marketing team. And if you're feeling generous, please tell someone about the show who you think would benefit. We're on a mission to help CMOs build their dream team and enable marketers to do their best work. And we appreciate your help in spreading the word.